Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. This show aims to inspire and equip you with the tools you need to navigate your career plans. FemLead brings inspiring career perspectives and strategies to guide your path to success. Your host, Alexandra, will interview role models on new exciting topics with each episode. If you like what you hear, give us a review and subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of FemLead Podcast. My next guest is Kathy Borys Siddiqui, the founder of Active Action, an organization supporting international companies, as well as internationals and their families, in the intercultural transition when moving abroad. Active Action focuses on raising awareness and bringing solutions to challenges that internationals, their families, and employers are faced with in order to create thriving and positive environments. Kathy lived in 4 countries and on 2 continents, holds an MA in Cultural Studies and in American Studies, and she is a firm believer that if you are lacking something, you should create it. She has been able to combine her passion and profession as an intercultural trainer and owner of Active Action with public speaking and branding initiatives, and describes herself as a well-being specialist. Today we discuss cultural adjustment and the notion of identity when moving abroad. So without further ado, let's welcome Kathy to FemLead Podcast. Kathy, welcome to FemLead Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here today. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me. It's a real pleasure. I'm looking forward to our chat.
I'm super excited to welcoming you, Kathy, because we've talked about some very interesting points that, you work with every day. So I already alluded in the intro that you have a very interesting day job. So we would love to know more about, what is the focus of your work? What does it mean to work in Active Action?
Yes, I do. I'm very blessed. I find myself very fortunate to do something that I'm very passionate about. So my big passion is working with internationals here in Denmark, also in the Nordics. And my focus is on not only the attraction of international talent, but mainly the retention of international talent. And here I use my skills with intercultural awareness, intercultural communication, and also well-being, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So basically what happens is I work with companies that hire internationally skilled talent. I work with municipalities and also universities and assist them in making sure that the Danish side and the international side can work really well together. That means being aware of where we come from, who we are, both for the Danes and for the internationals, being able to communicate about some differences, similarities, certain challenges, because the work ethic can also be very different depending on which culture we come from. So being able to have the tools to discuss certain differences with one another in a very respectful way, and also being able to learn from each other. So I always use kind of the ideology and the theory that I've developed of Active Action, which is awareness, acknowledgement, action, and assessment. So this can go for all scenarios in different cases that we deal with, but that we are aware of each other, where we come from, being able to learn from one another, being able to acknowledge how come someone is a certain way, how come I'm this way, and then being able to take action. How do we work together based on what we have learned from one another? And then assessing, how is that working for us? Is there anything else that we need? Are there any other tools? Is there any other information that we need in order to have thriving, inclusive, and really harmonious environments at work, and of course also in everyday life living? So that was a very long answer to your question.
I'm happy you talk about it at length, because I think this particular role that you've created for yourself, right, in a way, it's very, very relevant for my audience here. Because obviously I am an international in Denmark, and a lot of the people listening are also internationals in Denmark or somewhere else. They moved abroad, they moved the countries, now they have a different home country, if you may call it like that. Mm-hmm. So there are so many questions related to where do I belong once I decide to move across borders to a completely different culture. And I remember that when we spoke first, I mentioned the maybe not issue, but the topic of identity. Who am I now that I do not live in the country of origin and I decided to call another country home? How do I fit into that culture when I am not from that origin and I will never be 100% belonging to that culture, right? So there's this aspect of identity that I feel a lot of my friends and a lot of my network is experiencing nowadays with globalization and generally moving across borders. So we're going to tackle that as well, I think, because I would be very interested to know your point of view on it. And how do you tackle this particular subject with companies specifically, right? Because you said that you help companies with intercultural awareness. So what does it mean exactly to help companies with that?
Yes, that's an excellent question. What does that mean? Well, intercultural in general means that we are in between or working between two or more cultures. Right. And we see that in most countries now all over the world where we have people that come from different places. We are a global village, sort of say, fully in that meaning. And so it's very important that we understand, first of all, what intercultural means. These words keep changing. I'm not going to get really nerdy with you about cultural awareness and cultural studies. We also have transcending cultures now as well. So there's a lot and there's always new things to learn. But what I do with companies is really, it depends first and foremost on the client. It depends on the company, how large they are, how many internationals they have. But basically what we do is to really get an understanding first and foremost with the Danes. How do they define their culture for them to see what's important to them? What are their values? Because we need to look at ourselves first, always. That's that has always been my theory. If we know ourselves, if we're aware of ourselves, it's much easier for us to be open to others and to understand them. So that's one of the first steps. The second step is then to talk about people that come from other cultures, what's important to them, what values do they have. We try to look at similarities because we all have a lot of things in common. We tend to look at differences always, but I think it's good to flip that and look at what we have in common and then work from there, because it makes for a more, as I said before, inclusive environment when we can see what we have in common with one another. And it's actually a lot of things because people really, in the end, we all want to be belong to a community or a department. If we're talking about work, we want to feel that we are a part of something. We want to feel that we are bringing a purpose to our lives, to our work, to our colleagues, to our loved ones. So that is one of the main things that we share. Of course, if we have a company, that is also something that we share, that we work for that company. But we're really looking at how we can communicate, because that's the base of it. If we know how to communicate with one another, our lives will be much easier. We will be able to work together. We will be able to thrive together. And with that, if I break it down a little bit, I won't give you all the details because, of course, it depends on the needs of the client. But one of the top things is to really understand what is active listening. Because when we have people coming from different cultures in one environment, we have to learn not just to listen, but to be active listeners, to really focus on the person. What are they saying? And pay attention to what they're saying, repeat what they have said so that we acknowledge their point of view. And if there is any possibility of a misunderstanding, that's when it can get uncovered. That person can say, okay, no, that's actually not what I meant. And then, of course, it's also teaching clients about using open-ended questions. If we use yes or no questions, we lose a lot of value and a lot of information that could come with an open-ended question where a person will actually give more information as to how come something is important to them, or why this is challenging, or why they're not used to working this way. And of course, with that, we have to create a very safe environment, because people feel vulnerable, especially when they are coming from a different culture into a new environment. They feel the pressure. They want to be good at their jobs. They want to make sure that they are valued, that they will be respected for their work. But of course, they're also dealing with a lot of new challenging aspects of this job. So it's important to make them feel that it's okay to share your worries or things that you're not very sure of, and be able to discuss that together. It doesn't mean that you will be, looked upon as someone who's not doing their job well, that this is quite normal. We know that in Denmark, being honest and being upfront and really saying, okay, this is something that's challenging for me, is really actually appreciated and valued. So it's not a negative, it's a big positive. So that's the base of it. Then, of course, we also go into other details depending on what the need is, whether we're dealing with leadership, whether we're dealing with management, whether we're dealing with the whole company. So it depends on who we're talking to and what the challenges may be.
You mentioned some very important points, including the fact that we tend to look for differences when we could be looking for what makes us similar, right? Like, what do we have in common and what do we strive to achieve together, rather than what the differences makes us not be part of the same group. Yeah. And that's really key for the listeners also when we talk in the context of Scandinavia and Denmark in particular, that what you're sharing now really demonstrates that there is an interest to bring international talent in the country and integrate as much as possible their way of seeing the world with the way of working, because companies, like you've mentioned, they want to know what the expectations are from their international talents. And they also want to share what are the, Danish, I would say, working standards that, you need to understand also to be able to relate to the country you live in. Because now if you live here, you also need to understand, okay, why do people are upfront? And why do they appreciate the fact that you are direct in what you need? And I remember that one of my former managers told me one day out of the blue, which I think it's really fun because I learned a lot from that one lesson. He said, just so you know, I do not read any subtext. There's nothing here to be read through the lines. If I say something, it's what I mean. And it came out of the blue because we weren't talking about anything specific, but I think he noticed that I tend to overthink the message. And he stopped me and said, just so you know, this is it. I'm not trying to say anything else. And for me, that was a huge lesson in, well, also honesty, like I'm happy that I got to have that conversation and then be like, okay, yeah, actually sometimes overthink is like, I noticed and there's nothing to overthink here. This is what I'm saying. And those sort of experiences could probably prove to be very useful for more people if you know that, there's something there that you can first set as the base before you start thinking, okay, is this what he meant? Is this what she meant? Is this what my manager is trying to tell me, right? So like all of these different aspects of working together. And something that you've also noticed, mentioned that I noticed, is that you talked about adjustment and, being able to adjust in an environment that is new. So what is your experience with cultural adjustment? And maybe how do we explain this concept to people that are considering, okay, what is cultural adjustment? Maybe this is something that I should be aware of. And if we can also, if you think it's relevant, do you believe in culture shock? Is that something related to cultural adjustment?
Yes. Oh, so many layers. Okay, first I'm going to just backtrack to what you said about your previous manager. So kudos to your previous manager, because this is such an important aspect of being a manager of an international team, being able to read your team members and understanding that this is something they might be challenged with. One of the biggest issues that we face working in international environments are assumptions. That we assume that people know what we know. We assume that people receive information the way we receive it. And this can be quite a big danger, because coming from different cultures, this is definitely something we see where there are a lot of differences. How we use language as a tool, how we communicate with one another, and everything that's in between that sphere of words. So this is a super good example, and wonderful that he was able to see that and actually come to you and say that, because it made both of your lives much easier. Now going back to your question of intercultural adjustment phases. Yes, they are a huge part of us moving. It is a cycle. There is still, I say used to be because I don't use it anymore. There used to be in my work where I used the wave of, I think it was 12 months that it was shown as the cultural adjustment phases. I believe it's not just 12 months and it's not a wave. I believe it's a circle that continues to happen to us, those of us who live abroad. And of course, the first time we move to a host country, especially if it's a host country that's not fully aligned with us as individuals, so with our personality and our values, it can be very impactful. So what happens is the first stage is the honeymoon stage, where we see everything as new and wonderful. We're very excited. And you can always spot those internationals who are in that stage because they love everything. Everything is great. It's fantastic. And it's a great stage to be in. I always say in the workshops I facilitate, the energy you have during this stage is the one you should be using to make connections, to do a lot of networking, because you're on a high at that point. And you want to explore, you want to meet, you want to see as much as possible and take it in a very positive way. So this is the first stage. The second stage for many people, and it varies, it doesn't always go according to these stages. The second one usually is the culture shock. So yes, I do believe in it. It is something that we experience. And again, it's very individual. It depends on where you are, and it depends on you as a person. For some people, and many people I have talked to over the years, the Nordics can be very, very difficult, and the culture shock usually comes very strong. And overtakes really our whole life. It can be, and it's due to many different factors, which if we have time, we can talk about. But yes, culture shock happens when we realize that this new place is so different from what we know, that everything that felt familiar and safe and good to us is gone. And now we have to face all these challenges of the newness and not knowing how to maneuver in this new place. So this can be from basic things like, getting your yellow card, to going to the grocery store, to also having to work in a new company. So there are a lot of layers which come at us and seem very overwhelming. And culture shock can really be quite dangerous if you are not aware of it, because it can lead to depression. It can lead to severe depression if you're not aware of what's happening to you. It is a normal cycle. It happens to every single one of us who have moved abroad. And the important thing is to really be aware of these stages, to watch yourself and to see where you are and how you're feeling. And if you're not feeling well, to, of course, ask for help, because it can really spiral sometimes out of control. On a personal note, my experience with Denmark was not a very good one. In the beginning, I had a really strong culture shock, and I was extremely depressed for quite some time. So I know this firsthand. The good news is there's light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully during the honeymoon stage, you were able to establish some good contacts. So when you start to feel not so great, you have people around you that can be there as support, that can be there to talk to and to listen to you. And hopefully they are also the ones who have experienced this and maybe give good advice. The next one is the adjustment stage, where we start to feel more comfortable in our new host country, this is usually also goes hand in hand with starting to know the language. So we don't feel like we're children who can't express themselves. We don't feel so helpless. It's a huge factor in feeling better and feeling that you belong because you are aware and you understand of what people are saying, how the culture works. So usually you have learned a little bit more about the traditions, the values. And of course, if you're working, that is very helpful. If you're not working, it can be a little bit harder to go through these stages. And then we have the adaptation stage where we really feel comfortable and we pretty much know where we stand. We have a group of friends, communities where we can meet other people. So we feel quite balanced at this stage. And then, of course, the last one that we write in there, it depends on your international journey, is re-entry. So it's repatriation if you then decide to go back home. And then it can continue as well, because that part can be quite harsh for many people going back home after they've been abroad.
You mentioned so many good points that, at every stage I was like, when I was at this stage, what was I doing? How was my experience? Because I also had a hard time moving to Denmark. And I think that not being a student and not having a job really contributed to that culture shock. Yeah. Because it just took a long time to get a student job, which for me was very surprising because I had experience, but I didn't know how to navigate the market, right? So the fact that I thought I knew how to do something from before I moved to a new country and then it didn't work out the way I wanted really impacted me in my, phase of moving abroad and trying to build something in a new country. Yeah. And you also mentioned repatriation, which is a very interesting topic that if we have time in a different episode to discuss, I think a lot of people would find it very relevant because there's so many people in general that consider, is it, even after you stay for 10, 20 years in a country, is there something else in my country of origin that I should be, looking to build now that I've had all of these experiences? And then you go back and then you realize that nothing is the way you left. So you left it. So then you're like a little bit surprised and also in a shock, stage. So very interesting to discuss that as well. But you mentioned something that I would like to, briefly share more about, because I think it's very interesting for the audience. You said that there's some peculiarities with the Nordic cultures, and what does culture shock mean here? What do you mean exactly?
Let me just add that these cultural adjustment phases happen to everyone. Most of us who are internationals don't know that this is happening to us. And it is completely normal that you go through these phases. There's nothing wrong with you. And you're not going crazy. I have to really emphasize this because I have heard this from so many people that they are so relieved once they hear about this, that this is something that is totally normal. And it does pass. So when you find yourself at the worst, low, it will pass. And that is my promise to you. But you also have to take steps to help yourself, obviously. So yes, when I talk about the Nordics, what I mean with the culture shock is that there are additional things. So it's not just that we're changing from one culture to another culture. In the Nordics, what we have, there are specific things that we deal with, especially a lot of cultures. And I'm generalizing here a little bit, which I don't like to do, but we kind of have to explain it. A lot of us come from cultures that are quite open in the sense that we like to socialize with each other. And so it can be even as, small things like talking to a stranger at the bus stop or in a store. So we don't have that here. The Nordics are quite different in that sense, that socializing is seen in a different way. So that's usually one of the first aspects where people get a little bit shocked on top of the normal culture shock that they are going through. And we often hear, well, how come I can't make friends easily here? And that's not because people don't want to get to know you. There are unwritten rules of how these things work. So I always say it's really important to also do research for the culture that you're coming into, to get an understanding of what it is, because then you kind of prepare yourself for a bit of a softer landing if you understand things. Of course, they will still affect you, because coming in, you obviously want to create a community around yourself of people that you can have fun with and be able to speak to and go out to lunch to. But you have to understand the culture that we're coming into. This culture was here before us, and no one is trying to be rude or mean to us. As internationals, we often look at ourselves, we're focused on ourselves because we are going through a lot. And so we look for things that are good, but we also have a tendency to focus on things that don't go our way and then get upset with that society, and get upset with that host culture, that, how come they're being like this? That's the biggest question. And there are reasons for it. So, if we're looking at the Danish culture, the Danes are not trying to be rude or mean. They are simply very, very aware of their time. This is something that is very important to them. So investing their time in how they work, in how they live their lives, how they spend their time after work, but also investing time in friendships. Being adults, it's difficult enough to create new friendships, but then creating friendships between cultures is also difficult. So we have a tendency to become friends with internationals because it's easier and we understand one another, and we don't have this, well, is it worth it for me to invest time to be friends with Alexandra? She might leave in a year or two. No, we have a different mindset because we know that this is how our lives flow. So if we become friends, we become friends. A lot of times people stay friends after they move. That's also a beautiful thing, because then you have friends all over the world. So it's, again, looking into the positives. So that's one thing. The socializing and friendship aspect can be very different from what we know from our cultures or other places we've lived in. The second one, I'm not going to be very original, but it is the weather. The weather is very harsh. And of course, I would say we're still lucky. We're in Denmark, so we're not as far up north as other countries in the Nordics. And funny thing, I was once talking to a Finn, and it was in the winter. And I was saying, oh, we got a little bit of sunshine. And she was just sitting there looking at me with a very straight face. And she said, I'm in Finland. We don't get daylight during the winter. And I thought, so that was a big lesson for me, because of course, we think it's the worst where we're at, but other people are facing other challenges and it can be much worse. So the weather plays an aspect in it. And here, there's a lot we could talk about, but the fact is we don't get so much sunlight. We don't get so much vitamin D. The darkness sets in very early and it stays with us. And that can be extremely difficult. There are a lot of things that people also need to know moving to the Nordics and dealing with the fall and winter. And it affects us. It affects our brains. It affects our circadian rhythms. So it affects how we sleep, how we rest, how much energy we have during the day. And if you come into this country during the fall or winter, the culture shock can be times 200, because that will have a huge effect on you. So that's also another aspect of what I mean, that the culture shock can be quite severe in the Nordics. And of course, there are other aspects of it as well. One of them that comes to my mind always is networking, that, you have to be able to network here. And you have to be able to network anywhere. That's the truth. But as an international moving around, it's not just for the Nordics. Networking is key. So we have to hit the ground running, sort of say, and be able to meet with people, get as much information from people who are doing what we want to do or similar jobs, to learn from them. And we have to learn how to do it, because here trust is huge. So people are very protective of their networks. They're very protective of the people that they know. And sometimes we can really, set people off or rub them the wrong way, not meaning to, by asking a question. I'll give you an example. If I would say, I see that you're working for this company. can you get me in touch, for example, with the person that's responsible for, that's a big no-no, right? Where in another country, it might be okay to say that. Here, we would never say that because, as I said, trust is such a big thing, and people really, really value that. And they value the fact that, the people that are in their circle, they kind of protect them. So once they get to know you, and it takes time, then they might offer themselves to say, hey, I think maybe it would be a good idea for you to meet with this person for a coffee. You might have something in common.
Absolutely. I think while you are describing points of, why the Nordic cultures are a little bit more different, or just, let's say, harder to engage with from a completely, social point of view, which is fair, because you've mentioned some things that if you ask, I don't know, 100 internationals, 90 or 80 of them will tell you those are my problems. So it's not just that we made it up. It's really the experience of internationals. Yeah. And for all of us that are now in this setup and we're trying to build a life in a different country, the question is always, how do I make myself feel at home? Because when we discussed, we were also both agreeing that home is such a relative term now, because what does it mean to feel like home? You're not in your country of origin, so everything you kind of grew up with is different. But also, if you moved abroad when you were younger, if you moved abroad when you were an adult, everything that you've experienced changed the way you see home. So what does it mean to feel like home? Do you feel like there's some sort of, way of looking at your development once you move abroad from a career perspective? Because there's a lot of bottlenecks in career progression in general, right? Like there are different stages of career progression, and I'm sure internationals tell you all about here in Denmark specifically. Do you feel like there's something that we should be aware of if you move to Denmark or to a Nordic country from a career development perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very, very good question. The aspect of home we can talk about on another episode because it's a huge one. But when it comes to the professional life, there are most definitely situations that we can feel completely stuck. And one of the things I would say is that it's very important, especially in the Nordic countries, to be really proactive and to take initiative. So a lot of times people will come in and it depends on, of course, which chapter of your life you're in, how your family structure looks, whether you are a dual career couple or you have one person working, the other one is looking for a job. There are a lot of different issues that we face, but we simply can't sit and wait for someone to notice us. This is not the place. I would say it's not in any place where this would be recommended. But these countries, Nordic countries, Denmark specifically, is not this place. People really value you when they see that you're taking action, you're taking matters into your own hands. And it can be, for us, it can be, oh, I'm just volunteering, or I'm just trying to get a student job. No, people notice this and they really pay attention to it. They see, okay, this person, highly qualified person, is trying their best. And then they will come with help. Then they will come with advice. So again, I won't be as original, but I will say that networking is one of the key things. One of my very good friends, she moved here to Denmark. The minute her feet touched the Danish ground, she started networking. And, she has a job in communications, and people said, oh, this won't be easy because, there are so many people that do this type of work. You'll probably have a hard time. And, she just, again, you filter out also the negativity, because a lot of times people want to give advice, which is not really advice. You want to focus on really the positive aspects of who can bring some value and really help us. So she started networking and really reaching out to various people in different positions, but in communication, asking them questions. How did you get this position? What did you do? So really having coffee meetings where she was very exact and direct in what she wanted to ask. How come she was asking for this coffee meeting? And she got so much information out of that. She eventually ended up getting a job through networking, not ever asking for a job. That's another thing with networking. When we're networking, we're not going to ask someone to hire us. We have to be really clear on how come we want to meet and what value we can potentially bring to that person that we're meeting with. So it's a win-win for both. But it is that being proactive, really taking things into your own hands, seeing how can I get hired? What can I do? Where can I get information? What companies are interesting for me? So that's key. Also, don't lose sight of your worth. It's very, very important to make sure that you don't downplay your skills, your talents, your experience, the way you see the world, the way you see certain situations. We are really needed here in Denmark. It's not just a nice have. Companies need international talent now. It's really, we're in a crunch. So you can say no to things. You can ask for things. You need to really be aware of the fact that you are needed and you are very valuable. It's also, our way of looking at different situations and solutions are seen as innovative because they're different. They're not the same as what everyone is used to here. So this is really important. I would say make sure you take a look at your skills and talents, make a list, and some of the things that you don't even consider a skill and talent will be seen as that by people who are locals here. So be aware of the fact that you have a lot to offer, even when it feels like you are standing in place, because it is difficult. It's really hard to come into a new place. And sometimes we feel that we have to recreate our professional identity. We won't be able to do exactly what we were doing in the past. And that can be difficult. Sometimes people start with, having a position that's lower to what they're used to. But again, it can easily come up again. So it's really up to you. And if you say, I will take a lower position because I want to get my foot in the door. The key also in Denmark is that once you have your foot in the door, so what I mean by that is if you have a job, it's much easier to move to different jobs or different companies. So that starting point sometimes might feel like a failure, which it isn't. I know it's difficult to sometimes digest that, but if you think more long-term and into the future and not just, where I am right now, always think more ahead. Where do I want to get to? And Denmark is a great place to, build your career, to build a business, to have a startup. There are, this is a totally different topic, but there's so much help that we can get. So also be aware of that. Ask people who have been here, I want to do this and this. Do you have any tips for me? Where can I go? Where can I get some information? Yeah.
I would think
so
that
really
the part of connecting on the opposite point or on the previous point that you've made on the social networks is that people are very polite and helpful if you ask for help. So even though we just said that it might be more difficult or people experience difficulties in making, strong friendships, it doesn't mean that you don't get the help you need to kickstart your career here. So very good advice to not give up on your opportunities because the first job you get in a foreign country is not the dream job that you've wanted, because you are very right with the way that career progression happens in a country like Denmark, where moving from a company to another really is about networking and is about kind of showing that you've proven your skills somewhere. And then from there on, how can you bring innovation to another company using the skills that you've also impacted another company in the same country? So that's really something that I think a lot of internationals will appreciate knowing once they think they have maybe some difficulties too. But I want to move to discussing a little bit your story, because you also are an international in Denmark, and you also have your own progression in terms of how you build your career. So I would like to ask you if you can sum up, what are the 3 most important lessons that you learned in your career?
3. I don't think it'll be three, but I will try my best. The first one is collaboration. So I'm a collaborator by heart. I believe in collaboration and support of others. And what I mean by that is if I can provide a job for someone else, I will. What I mean by that is also that I am supportive of my fellow, and I'm not a feminist, but it's really important for me to especially support international females abroad. So if I can, I will do so. And this is through various things. It can be through, sharing an article on LinkedIn, through liking something. I think we need to be more collaborative in general as women. And again, this is a separate topic, but I think it's really important to have that mindset. The pie is big enough. There is enough work. There are enough clients for everybody. If we go into doing, let's say, a presentation, you and I, your presentation will be completely different from mine. We have different experiences, different perspectives, different backgrounds. So we need to stop this fear of helping each other. This is so important. And especially as internationals, we need to help one another, period, whether it's through our sharing our experience, bringing people into networks. Collaboration is first and foremost what I've learned through my journey as well. And then giving back. I've had people help me. I help people now. And I think that's the way to go. Awareness, but really being aware of what it is that I'm doing, where I'm going, what I want to bring forward to my clients, to people I work with, to society in general, but also being aware of who I work with. Why am I working with these people? Being aware of my own brand. It's very important in business. And this doesn't matter whether you're working for a company or you have your own business. Branding is really, really important. It's also part of networking. It's something that can elevate our businesses, our careers. So awareness also of how I work. What is my work ethic? What are my values? How I've changed, where I used to be, where I am now. So this is really important in work and in life. Listening to your inner voice would probably be my top one, even though it's not the first one I mentioned. When you feel that something is not right, it's not right. Don't try to stifle that voice. Don't try to ignore it. I've had many instances where I thought, it doesn't feel right. I don't think this is the right person, or this is the right client, or this is something I don't want to do. And I know it sounds very much, coming from a privileged background, but it doesn't matter where you are in your career. Really, if you feel it's not right, you need to find a different solution, a different place. We have too many people who, are faced, and again, this is a completely different topic, but well-being, stress, depression, mental health is something that we're struggling with immensely. And part of the reason is also this, that we don't listen to ourselves. We don't listen to our inner voice. We need to take care of ourselves. And we can also avoid a lot of, stressful situations and really unpleasant situations if we listen to that. So in business, always trust your gut. I would say that's key. And then the last one is also authenticity, being true to myself, being true to what I believe in. And this goes hand in hand also with the awareness, with the inner voice, because, in the end, when I feel that I've done a good job, I've helped people, I've worked with people who are also aligned with my values. It comes with experience, I think, that you are able to say, do I want to work with that person? Do I want to work for that person? We've been conditioned to be the type of people that, someone's offering me a job. Someone's offering me, a project. Okay, I'll take it. No, we need to take a moment and assess it and really think about, do I want to work with these people? Is it a place that, is also going to be good for me? Not just me being good for them. So always having that perspective and being able to make sure that you're valuing yourself.
Right. So cool that you've mentioned all of this, Kathy. I wish there were another hour to discuss all of the aspects, because you also have a lot of experience in career development as a topic, especially from hearing from so many internationals that had issues or some sort of difficulties. So I'm sure there's more advice to be given, but we do need to go forward to the Fire 5 final questions. And we're going to ask you first, what is one book that you think everyone should read?
Okay, as I mentioned to you, I don't have one, but one book. Can I divide it into professional and private?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So if I look at my professional life, the first one I would say is The Culture Map by Erin Myers. Most definitely. Second one is Simon Sinek's Why, and Seth Godin's Linchpin. So those would be my three top picks. This was really difficult for me because I love books. On a personal level, I would say anything by Gabby Bernstein. Lisa Feldman Barrett. This is me geeking out a little bit about the brain and neuroscience. So she writes books about the brain. Very, very interesting. And on a very personal level, I would say Don Miguel Ruiz. I can send those to you, and then you can link these authors. Also, various books by him. So those would be my top picks.
Okay, fantastic. We have now a reading list that we're going to share after your episode is live. I look forward to it.
Excellent.
Okay, what is the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
Yes. The best piece of advice was that if someone else is doing it, so can you.
I love it. Who is your role model?
This is a tricky one. I don't have one. I have many. And not to sound really, conceited, but I have always loved what Matthew McConaughey said when he got his Oscar, that it's myself in 10 years. And then after that, me in 10 years, because it's true. First and foremost, we don't value what we do enough. We don't look at all the achievements that we have accomplished, especially being internationals abroad. We should really celebrate ourselves more, our achievements, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and to look at the challenges we faced, how we have grown. So I would say that, but I would also say all the women that came before me, all the women that are currently doing the work that they do. And then, I'm a mom of a 9-year-old girl, the girls that will be doing the work after we are retired and we are gone. So again, not a feminist, but definitely these role models. I have a lot of people who I work with who are also my role models in the sense of, how they approach challenges, how innovative they are, how they've built their businesses. So there's not one person.
Mm-hmm. No, but you also mentioned some very important facts about reflection and not giving up on yourself if things don't work out your way from the beginning, right? So this is also part of the let's say advice section if we want to sum up with that. Okay,
learn, right? Because there is no failure. We have a lesson in every step of the way, whether we're building our career or a business.
Absolutely.
Always learn from what has happened. Always ask why, and then see how you can do it in a better way or a different way next time.
Absolutely. What would you choose to do if you were to have another career?
I wouldn't want to have another career, but if I was choosing, there are two things. It would either be psychology or I would be a neuroscientist.
I definitely see that for you. So great. And the last question, Kathy, if you could change places with someone, who would it be and why?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't change places.
That's fantastic. That's a great way to end the interview. Kathy, it was a pleasure to talk to you today. I think you have so many more lessons to share, and I hope we'll get to meet again and discuss all of the different intricacies of working with such a cool subject. And you're really impacting people's lives, and I'm very happy that you came here today at Family to tell us what you do and how important your work is and what does it mean for people who are really impacted by it. So thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure, and I hope there is some value in there. So thank you, Alexandra. Thank you to the listeners. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening today, and stay tuned for more interviews with inspiring role models.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of FemLead Podcast. Share the news with your friends and follow us on social media at FemLead Podcast everywhere.